Welcome back to Only Talk Sports. We talk sports every single day, or at least we try to. I'm Roach Jeffrey, and subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Hit that notification bell so you never miss another video. Now, the Week 15 AP Top 25 poll in college basketball is out, and I'm going to go over the rankings this week and see what I think about them. Alabama is the #1 team in college basketball this week, and they are now officially a basketball school. Nah, I'm just kidding. Alabama is still a football school, but Alabama is having a great season in college basketball this year. They are 22-3, and they move up to #1 now that Purdue lost. And Alabama won against Florida, and they won at Auburn this past week. And if Nate Oates can continue to have Alabama playing the type basketball that they're playing right now, then Alabama will continue to stay at #1. Houston's at #2, and they've been playing great basketball this year as well. Kelvin Sampson has a fantastic team, and they've been rolling through American Conference play. They won against Tulsa this past week, and if Houston was playing tougher opponents right now, they probably would have been the #1 team because they have one fewer loss than Alabama does. So you can make an argument for them to be the #1 team, but Alabama did beat Houston head-to-head, and since Alabama's been playing much tougher competition in the SEC, that's probably why the AP voters put Alabama at #1. Purdue's at #3, and they won against Iowa, and they lost at Northwestern this past week. Purdue's run of being #1 has ended. They're having a great season under Matt Painter, and when they lost at Indiana, they stayed as the #1 team. When they lost at Northwestern, they just could not stay at #1 this time. Northwestern's a really solid team, but Purdue now has 3 losses, and Alabama and Houston have been winning basketball games, and Purdue's lost twice in the last 2 weeks, so that's why Purdue dropped to #3. UCLA's at #4, and they won at Oregon State, and they won at Oregon this past week. UCLA has taken over the reins of the Pac-12. They've been the most dominant team in that conference so far this season. Arizona started out hot really early, but the Bruins have been playing great as the season's gone along. Mick Cronin has them playing great basketball, and if they can continue to keep winning, they'll stay in the top 5. Kansas is at #5, and they won against Texas, and they won at Oklahoma this past week. Kansas hit a rough skid, but they bounced back out of that now. They're playing much better basketball now, and they only have 5 losses, and they're only 1 game back behind Texas, who they beat this past week in the Big 12 title race. And Bill Self always gets the Jayhawks playing better basketball as they get closer to March Madness, and this year's no exception. Texas is at #6, and they're 20-5 as well, and they lost at Kansas, and they won against West Virginia this past week. Texas is having a great year in the Big 12 with Chris Beard gone, and now you have Rodney Terry as the interim head coach. He's done a fantastic job having Texas still playing great basketball. If Texas hadn't been able to beat Kansas, they might have been the #4 or #3 team in the country, but unfortunately for Texas, they could not get the win. But Texas still has a lead in the Big 12 conference standings, and if they can keep winning, they could possibly win the Big 12. Virginia's at #7, and they won against NC State, and they won against Duke this past week. Even though there was a controversial ending to that Duke game, Virginia has been playing much better basketball, and they've been winning a lot of games in the ACC. And with the ACC having a lot of teams struggling this season, Virginia has taken hold of the conference. And if they can continue to win, then Tony Bennett's squad has a great chance to win the ACC. Arizona's at #8 this week, and they won at California, and they lost at Stanford this past week. Arizona's Pac-12 woes have struck again. Arizona's lost 4 games in the Pac-12 conference this year, and all those games were to teams that they should have beaten. They've lost to Stanford, Utah, Washington State, and Oregon, and those are all games that they should have won. No team is perfect, and Arizona has a lot of talent, but Tommy Lloyd's going to have to get his team focused to be able to beat the smaller teams just as much as they're able to win the big games, because if Arizona's a top seed in the March Madness and they play a smaller team, they could slip up if they continue to play the way they've currently been playing, overlooking opponents. Baylor's at #9, and they won against Oklahoma, and they won at TCU this past week. Baylor's one of the hottest teams in college basketball right now. Scott Drew has really turned his team around from when they were unranked at 10-5, but now they're 19-6. They've won 9 of their last 10 games, and they're rolling through Big 12 play, and they just keep getting win after win, and they're playing great basketball right now, and they're definitely deserving of a top 10 ranking. Tennessee's at #10, and they lost twice this past week at Vanderbilt, and they lost to Missouri, both on buzzer-beating shots. This was a really tough week for Rick Barnes' team. I still think Tennessee has a lot of talent, but they should have been able to beat Vanderbilt and Missouri. Unfortunately, they lost on buzzer beaters, both heartbreaking losses, so it's not like they played poorly, so that's why they didn't drop too far. But Tennessee's going to have to get back on track if they want to stay in the top 10. Marquette's at #11, and they lost at UConn, and they won at Georgetown this past week. Marquette had been rolling through Big East play, and Shaka Smart had the Golden Eagles playing great basketball, and they're still playing really well. But that was a really tough loss at UConn. They did not play very well in that game, but Marquette still is atop the Big East right now, and if they can continue to win as the regular season closes, then Marquette could still win the Big East. Kansas State's at #12, and they do not move this week, and they beat TCU, and they lost at Texas Tech this past week. Kansas State is a really solid team, but they have been losing some games recently. decently. They were playing much better basketball a few weeks ago, but now they're kind of struggling a little bit. But the Big 12 conference will do that to you. There's so many great teams in the league. If you play bad on one night, you're going to slip up. But Kansas State's still worthy of a top 15 ranking right now, and Jerome Tang has done a fantastic job in his first season with the Kansas State Wildcats. Gonzaga's at number 13, and they won against San Francisco, and they won against BYU this past week. Gonzaga's still one game behind St. Mary's, but they still have a shot to win the West Coast Conference. And Mark Few has done such a fantastic job with the Bulldogs over his long career as their head coach that this year seems like a down year for Gonzaga, but they're still playing great basketball. They're just not as good as they've been in the past, and their guard play is a bit down, but they're still really solid. And they've still been pretty dominant West Coast Conference play, even if they're not atop the league right now and they haven't been winning games as dominantly as they used to. Indiana's at number 14, and they won against Rutgers, and they won at Michigan this past week. Indiana's playing much better basketball as of late. They were at one point 10-6 and 1-4 in the Big Ten, but now they're 18-7 and 9-5 in the conference. They've won 8 of their last 9 games. They've been playing much better basketball. Mike Woodson's team's been playing probably the best basketball in the Big Ten over the last 9 games. And if Trace Jackson Davis keeps playing at a high level, and if Indiana can get Xavier Johnson back, then they could end up being the second best team in the Big Ten. Miami's at number 15, and they won against Duke and they won against Louisville this past week. Miami's been taking care of business lately, not losing to teams that they shouldn't be losing like they were earlier in the year. And with the ACC being a bit down this year, Miami's taking advantage of that, and they're playing really well lately. And if Miami can continue to win, they can keep pace with Virginia and maybe have a shot to win the ACC. Xavier's at number 16, and they lost at Butler this past week. Xavier's been kind of like Arizona this season, where they've been playing a lot of great basketball, and they've won a lot of big games, but they've also slipped up at DePaul and at Butler in the Big East Conference this season. And even though it's always tough to win on the road, if Xavier had won both of those games, they could have had a really good shot to win the Big East this year. They still have a chance, but Sean Miller's team took a couple of tough losses in Big East play that they should have won, but Xavier's still having a really great season. St. Mary's is at number 17, and they lost at Loyola Marymount, and they won at Portland this past week. That was a really tough loss for St. Mary's, losing at Loyola Marymount, but Gonzaga lost to Loyola Marymount at home, so they are a really tough team. But if St. Mary's had won that game, then they would have had a great chance to win the West Coast Conference. They're still one game ahead of Gonzaga, but if they do drop any more games in the future, then they have a chance to still lose out to Gonzaga in the conference title race. But St. Mary's is still having a great season, and they definitely are still deserving of the top 25 ranking. Creighton's at number 18, and they won at Seton Hall, and they won against UConn this past week. Creighton's been another team that's one of the hottest teams in college basketball right now. They've won 8 games in a row. They were 9-8 at one point when Ron Kalkbrenner was coming off of his injury, and they weren't really playing well, and they lost 6 games in a row. But now Creighton, they're 17-8, and they're playing some of the best basketball in the country right now, and they're moving up the Big East standings as well and still have an outside shot to win the league. And Greg McDermott, he's got his team rolling right now. And if Creighton can continue to win big games, they'll definitely move up the AP Top 25 poll. Iowa State's at number 19, and they lost at West Virginia, and they lost to Oklahoma State this past week. Iowa State, like last year, started out the season really well, and TJ Otzelberger had Iowa State as one of the best teams in college basketball last year. But then they started to fall apart toward the end of the season last year, and this year they seem to be doing the same. They're now 16-8. And in the past few games, they've been losing more than they've been winning in the Big 12. And it's always tough to win games in the Big 12 this year because of how many great teams that there are. But Iowa State is really starting to struggle a little bit right now. They got to get back on track. They still have so many great wins, and that's why they're still in the top 25. But Iowa State's going to have to turn things around if they want to stay in the top 25. UConn's at number 20, and they won against Marquette, and they lost at Creighton this past week. UConn, they started out the season 14-0, but since entering Big East play, they've really been struggling. But Dan Hurley has righted the ship a little bit by getting a big win over Marquette this past week, and UConn did get some wins over the bottom teams in the Big East. But UConn still needs to get back to their high level of play at the beginning of the season if they want to reach the potential that UConn had at the beginning of the season. But they're still a really solid team with a great resume that's still worthy of a top 25 ranking. San Diego State's at number 21, and they've been playing really well this season. They won at Utah State, and they won against UNLV this past week. They're starting to separate themselves as the team to beat in the Mountain West this season. It looked like New Mexico was the best team in the conference early on in the season, but now San Diego State's playing much better basketball as of late. And Brian Dutcher is one of the best coaches in college basketball, and he has the Aztecs playing great basketball toward the end of the season. TCU's at number 22, and they lost at Kansas State, and they lost to Baylor this past week. TCU, like Iowa State, starting to fade down the stretch of the Big 12 season. They've been losing a lot of games lately, but TCU in their defense does not have Mike Miles, and that's really hurting them right now. He's a great player, and he's their leading scorer, and with him out, TCU's trying to find other options to be their go-to scorer, and they just don't have that player right now. And TCU's going through the gauntlet of the Big 12. If if Mike Miles was still playing for TCU, they probably would have a better record right now. But if they can get him healthy and get him back on the court, I still think TCU is definitely a top 25 team. But if they can't get him back, then there's a really good chance TCU falls out of the top 25 soon. NC State's at number 23, and they lost at Virginia and they won at Boston College this past week. NC State's been a really good team in the ACC this year. They've really helped to fill the void in the ACC this year with a lot of teams being down this year. And Terquavian Smith coming back for the Wolfpack was really huge, and he's been playing great basketball this year. NC State's definitely looking like a tournament team, and they've been playing much better basketball as of late, even though they did lose at Virginia, and they're hanging on in the top 25 for now. Providence is at number 24, and they won against Georgetown. They lost at St. John's this past week. Providence is another team that was playing really great basketball at the beginning of the season, but they are starting to struggle a little bit toward the back end of Big East play. Ed Cooley's done a great job with his team this year, and Bryce Hopkins has been a fantastic addition for the Friars this year. But Providence is going to have to start winning some more games if they want to stay in the top 25 because they're barely hanging on for now. Florida Atlantic's at number 25, and they won against Rice and they won against Louisiana Tech this past week. They moved back into the top 25 because a lot of teams lost. But Florida Atlantic, they're a mid-major team, and they're going to have to win the rest of their games down the stretch of the season if they want to stay in the top 25 because they did lose a game last week, which knocked them out of the top 25. But Florida Atlantic's been a great team with only 2 losses this year, and they're at number 25 in the top 25 rankings. And Rutgers drops out of the top 25 because they lost 2 games this past week. They're still a really solid team. They're going to have to start winning some games if they want to move back into the top 25. In the other team votes, you have Missouri, who won at Tennessee this past week. And Missouri definitely has a case to be in the top 25 rankings. Winning at Tennessee was huge, but they're just outside the top 25 for now. Northwestern is the second team in the other team votes, and they beat Purdue this past week. So Northwestern's a bit surprising that they're not in the top 25. Illinois, Pittsburgh, Nevada, Oklahoma State, Texas A&M, Oral Roberts, Iowa, Arkansas, Rutgers, Charleston, Maryland, and Boise State round out the other team votes. And all these teams have a chance to be back into the top 25 if they keep winning. And Missouri and Northwestern, even though they're not in the top 25 now, if they keep playing high-level basketball, will definitely move into the top 25 rankings next week. So that is the Week 15 AP Top 25 poll rankings. A lot of movement has been happening with all these big gains, and there's been a lot of upsets that are shaking up the rankings. And now that we're getting close to March Madness, it's getting into crunch time where all these teams are trying to win big games to impress the tournament committee, and it's really created a lot of excitement this college basketball season. Comment down below what you think about the Week 15 AP Top 25 poll rankings, and if you think the teams are ranked where you thought they'd be, and if there's any team that you think should be ranked that isn't, and there's any team that is ranked that shouldn't. Subscribe to the channel if you like sports content. Like this video down below, and I will see you next time.